It began in October 2020 in the town of Winter Creek, Montana. A small, dust-blown place, with streets that knew silence better than sound. The kind of town where wind carried old secrets, and nothing changed unless it broke. On the edge of this town stood the county prison, gray concrete, fences laced with rusted barbed wire, and security cameras that didn't guard from the outside, but watched within. That was where they brought Jack Hales, former mechanic, convicted for an accident that took a life. No one came to see him off. No one waited at the gates. No one except her. Her name was Gracie, a purebred German shepherd with sharp ears and eyes that seemed to understand things people didn't say. Since the day Jack was taken in handcuffs, she had come to the prison gate. At first, every day, then every other. Then, whenever she could slip away. She didn't know that Jack had died only 3 weeks into his sentence, an unexpected heart attack in the infirmary wing, silent and alone. There was no one to notify, no one who would come. Only Gracie remained. She came without leash or command. She waited without barking, sat across the road beneath the shadow of a pine tree, eyes fixed on the steel gates that never opened for her. Sometimes she stood when she heard footsteps. Sometimes she lifted her head when the shift bell rang. And when nothing happened, she curled tighter into herself and waited again. Gracie wasn't abandoned. Not in the usual way. She had food left in the bowl behind the trailer where they once lived. A backyard she could have stayed in. But she didn't. Something in her refused to believe he was gone. The last she saw of Jack, he had looked back once, over his shoulder as they closed the van door. That look had anchored something inside her, a promise unspoken but deeply understood. The prison staff noticed her. At first they tried to chase her off, waved arms, shouted, even called animal control. But she always returned, quiet, unbothered, as if she belonged to the building as much as the locks and sirens did. A few of the guards began leaving scraps near the fence. One volunteer left out a blanket when the first snow fell. Winter Creek forgot about Jack Hales, but Gracie didn't. She had no clock, no calendar, only the steady rhythm of the gates that opened and closed. Each clang was a question, each silence a disappointment. Yet still, she stayed. Not because she was trained to, not because someone told her to, but because that was where he had gone. And in her world, if you love someone, you wait. Even when no one tells you where they've gone. Even when the wind starts carrying other stories. Even when the silence becomes the only answer. Gracie made her place beneath the wide branches of the pine tree that grew just across the road from the prison's main gate. At first, the guards tried to chase her off, clapping their hands, shouting, tossing pebbles toward her feet. But she never growled, never barked. She simply moved back a few steps, waited until they turned away, and returned to her spot as if nothing had changed. In time, they gave up. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't a nuisance. She was just there, like the fence, like the cold. Some began to nod when they saw her. A few volunteers from the town noticed too. They brought paper bowls with dog food and clean water. Someone left a note taped to a tree trunk asking others not to disturb her. One of the guards, an older man with a limp, started bringing an old wool blanket during his night shifts and tucking it beneath the tree. Autumn passed without announcement. The leaves fell and blew across the road like forgotten pages, and Gracie watched them without moving. Then came the first snow. Soft at first, then thick and heavy, clinging to the fence, weighing down the tree limbs. Her shelter became a mound of white. Still, she stayed. She burrowed into it, curled tightly against the cold, breathing in the wind and the silence. She didn't whimper. She didn't leave. Every morning, when the gate opened for the first shift, she lifted her head. Every night, when the last light in the watchtower dimmed, she lowered it again. If the door clanged, she stood. If the sirens whined, she paced once along the edge of the road, then returned. Sometimes she walked the perimeter of the fence, not searching, not restless, just checking, as if making sure it was still there, still holding him. The prison became her compass. The guards, the trucks, the routine of opening and closing, all of it etched into her internal clock. Without Jack, her world had collapsed inward to this narrow stretch of land between the road and the fence. She didn't chase cars. She didn't bark at strangers. She didn't follow anyone who called her. She wasn't waiting for a better home or a warm couch. She was waiting for him. Nothing else made sense. Some nights, when the wind was high and the frost sank into the earth, she would tremble in her sleep. Not from cold, but from dreams. Twitches in her legs, ears flicking at sounds only she heard. But every time morning came, she would stretch, shake off the frost, and take her place again, facing the gates, watching, waiting. There was no countdown, no calendar, just the quiet, stubborn rhythm of devotion. Gracie had become the shadow at the edge of the prison, the one who never left, the one who kept a silent vigil over something no one else remembered. Half a year passed, then another. The seasons folded over each other quietly, and Gracie remained. People stopped being surprised by her presence. She became part of the background, like the leaning utility pole near the corner or the rusted stop sign with half its paint washed away by storms. No one asked questions anymore. The guards nodded as they passed. The warden sometimes watched her from the window during his coffee break. Even the new recruits learned not to shoo her away. She was just there. Pity faded with time. She was not a stray to be pitied, not a lost cause to be rescued. She was a fixture, a quiet ritual, a story the town didn't tell, but somehow all knew. Children sometimes came to see her, standing behind their parents, whispering. A few tried calling her. A woman once brought a leash and treats, thinking she could coax Gracie into a better life. But the dog never barked, never growled, never ran. She simply turned her gaze away, as if the world beyond the gates no longer concerned her. She lived like Jack could return any day. Her posture never slackened into despair. Her eyes never wandered far from the door. If a man with dark hair emerged, she stood. If it wasn't him, she sat again. Nothing in her was broken, just paused. Paused in a moment she refused to let go. In the spring of 2022, a new corrections officer arrived, Lana Bishop. She was young, just out of training, full of questions and energy the others had long burned away. She asked about the dog on her first day. The response was short. She waits. Let her be. But Lana couldn't forget the image. That dog, so still, so alone. Something about her presence was too steady, too purposeful to ignore. So Lana began to visit. At first, she came after her shifts, standing a few yards away, watching in the fading light. Then she brought a thermos of tea and sat cross-legged near the tree. Gracie didn't approach. She didn't retreat either. It was as if she understood that the silence was respectful, not demanding. Days turned into weeks. One evening, when the wind was soft and the pine needles barely moved, Lana stretched out her hand. Gracie didn't flinch. The next evening, she moved closer. Then, one day, without warning, Gracie stepped forward and laid her head gently in Lana's lap. She stayed that way for a long time, as if testing a memory she didn't want to lose. But when the gates clanked or the shift bell rang, her ears lifted. Her eyes turned. She watched. Every time. Lana noticed it, understood it. She didn't try to pull Gracie away. She didn't ask for more. She just returned, again and again, offering presents instead of promises. Gracie didn't choose a new human. She was still waiting for the old one, and time, to her, didn't move in months or seasons. It moved in footsteps she hadn't heard yet, in a door that hadn't opened, in a face that hadn't appeared. She waited with a patience that couldn't be explained. Because when the heart believes something is unfinished, it doesn't measure time like everyone else. It simply stays. If this story touched your heart and you love animals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Lana couldn't stop thinking about the dog who waited without knowing. Something in the way Gracie watched the gate haunted her, like a question that no one had tried to answer. So she began asking around, quietly at first. A few questions to the older guards, then a visit to the records room, files thick with dust and fading ink. It didn't take long. The name was still there. Jack Hales. Died 3 weeks after his intake. Heart failure. No foul play. A note in the margin said, state burial. No listed relatives. No one to notify. And in the space marked next of kin, just a dash. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't neglect. It was something quieter. Something harder to fix. A forgotten line on a forgotten form. A man had died, and a dog had waited. One knew the ending. The other was left in the middle of the story. Lana read the file 3 times. Then she walked down to the evidence storage and asked about personal effects. There wasn't much. A watch. A rusted key. A flannel jacket with the elbows worn thin. It smelled of engine oil and sun, and something faintly human. She asked if she could take it. No one objected. The next day, she didn't bring food, didn't bring a leash. Just the jacket, folded in her arms. She crossed the road at sunset as the wind pushed shadows across the gravel. Gracie lay in her usual spot, head resting on her paws, eyes fixed on the gate. She didn't look up until Lana sat down. Without a word, Lana unfolded the jacket and laid it on the ground beside her. Not on Gracie, not too close, just near enough. At first, the dog didn't move. Her ears shifted slightly. Then her nose twitched. Once, twice. A breath, deep and sharp, like a memory surfacing. Gracie stood, slowly. She took one step, then another, lowered her head, inhaled again. And something broke. Not loud, not wild, a sound soft and raw. A whimper caught in her throat. Her body trembled as she crouched, pressing her head to the fabric, tail tucked, paws shaking. She didn't cry the way people do. But grief has no one language. Her silence was louder than any howl. Lana stayed still. She didn't reach out. She didn't speak. Gracie needed the space between the moments. Space to understand. Space to feel. After a while, the dog stepped back, turned in a slow circle, looked at the gate, then ran. Not toward it, but along the fence. Fast, not searching, not hoping, just running. She traced the entire perimeter, paws kicking up dry earth, tongue lolling, breath heaving like something sacred had just let go. It wasn't panic. It wasn't desperation. It was something else. A ritual of release. By the time she returned, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The jacket lay still on the dirt, dust clinging to its sleeves. Gracie walked to it one last time, lowered her head, closed her eyes. She wasn't waiting anymore. Not in the same way. A week passed, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, Gracie didn't appear at the prison gates. The routine clanged forward without her. The guard shift changed. The doors opened and closed. But the shadow beneath the tree across the road remained empty. Lana felt it before she confirmed it. That subtle shift in the world when something faithful goes missing. After her shift, she drove the outskirts of Winter Creek, following a feeling more than a plan. Fields rolled into low hills, dust curling around the tires. Then, near an overgrown patch of fencing, she saw her. Gracie was sitting in the tall grass, head lifted toward the horizon. There was no tension in her body, no urgency, just a stillness, deep and settled. Behind her stood the remnants of a path worn by pause and memory, a place where Jack once walked with her on Sundays. The wind carried faint scents of rust, dry wheat, and the echo of footsteps long gone. Lana stepped out of the car slowly. She didn't call. She didn't coax. She just waited. After a moment, Gracie turned her head. Her eyes met Lana's, steady and tired. Then she stood, walked forward, not hurried, not reluctant, just ready. She reached the car and stopped, looking up at the open door. She climbed in on her own. Lana drove back through the town with the window cracked. The air was cool and dry. Gracie didn't pace. She didn't watch the road. She rested her head on the seat, eyes half closed, body curled in quiet surrender. It wasn't trust exactly. It was something more resigned, something shaped by waiting too long in silence. At home, the house greeted them with stillness. No alarms, no concrete, no keys turning in metal locks. Gracie walked through each room carefully, her paws making soft sounds on the floor. She didn't sniff like most dogs. She moved like someone cataloging a place they'd never meant to enter. She lay down in the entryway, not curled up, not alert, just present. For days, she barely ate. Lana placed food nearby and let it sit. Gracie drank, walked to the door to listen, and then lay down again. There was no pacing, no restlessness, only breath, quiet and even, like the exhale after long grief. Then one evening, as the sun folded behind the hills, she stood. She walked into the living room where Lana sat reading. She paused, then took the last few steps and placed her head gently against Lana's knee. Lana didn't move. She let her stay. Gracie closed her eyes, not in her place, not yet, but close enough to rest. 3 months passed. Gracie did not forget. Sometimes she still sat by the window, eyes drifting to the horizon, as if watching for something. But it no longer carried the sharp edge of waiting. It was softer now, as if something within her had settled, had granted permission to stay. Each morning she walked beside Lana through the quiet streets of Winter Creek. Her pace was slow but steady. She sniffed the wind, paused at corners, and returned with the calm rhythm of someone who finally understood where they belonged. She followed Lana through the routines of the day. When Lana read on the porch, Gracie curled at her feet. When Lana sat by the fire, Gracie rested her head against her leg. Her eyes, once filled with silent pleading, now mirrored peace. The same gaze she once gave the prison gates, she now gave to the woman who had waited without asking. Then one evening, the sky flushed gold with sunset. The house was quiet. The light filtered through the blinds in long, soft lines. Lana found Gracie lying by the front door. She didn't lift her head. She didn't shift. She was simply still, not in pain, not struggling, just still. Her body rose and fell gently with each breath, until it didn't. There was no cry, no final gasp, just a long exhale, and then silence. Lana sat down beside her. She didn't cry. She ran her hand gently through Gracie's fur, now slightly silvered around the muzzle. The warmth of the last light brushed across them both. There was nothing left to say, because something whole had happened, not an ending, but a release. And in that silence, there was forgiveness. Not for leaving, but for waiting.